evening, everyone. Welcome to A Cosmic Cuppa with Jude. I would love to introduce you to Mary Rodwell, who is an amazing woman I've been wanting to get to know better for quite some time, and she very graciously has said that we can have a Cosmic Cuppa with her. So, Mary, how are you this evening?
I'm very well, thank you. And we've just talked about having a nice cup of something, but ours is water and a cup of tea.
Absolutely. So, Mary, with your permission, I'd like to read out your bio.
Yes, by all means.
Okay. So, Mary Rodwell, a former nurse, midwife, counsellor, hypnotherapist, Reiki Master, founder and principal of ACERN, Australian Close Encounter Resource Network. Mary is recognised internationally for her work with families and children, which gets to my heart particularly, who have experienced encounters and contact with non-human intelligences. Mary is the founder and principal of ACERN, offering counselling and information to families experiencing encounters with non-human intelligences, which is in the sentence before, but it's being said again. ACERN operates internationally, and Mary has worked with 3,500 individuals and their families, probably more since this was written. ACERN provides information, counselling and hypnotherapy to individuals and their families experiencing anomalous paranormal events, specialising in encounters with other beings apart from human. ACERN researches this phenomenon through a holistic framework, physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual. Mary is a former nurse midwife, as has been said earlier. She's an international speaker and researcher of anomalous phenomenon. She's the creator of Inner Alchemy meditation CDs at www.newmindecords.com. Mary is recognised internationally as one of Australia's leading researchers. She has lectured in Australia, internationally in the UK, Canada, USA, Hong Kong, France, Malta, Scandinavia, Hawaii, Ireland, Brazil, and yay, New Zealand. Featured in international and national media news programs and documentaries, The Oz Files, My Mum Talks to Aliens, SBS 2010, Paranormal Files, UK, and Animal X Multidimensional and UFOs Down Under, 2023, Australian Skies 2. Mary is the co-founder and co-director of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation for research into extraterrestrial encounters and an advisory member of Exopolitics. She is also the author of Awakening, How Extraterrestrial Contact Can Transform Your Life in 2002, and The New Human, Awakening to Our Cosmic Heritage, 2016. NHI research qualified by the in-depth surveys conducted by FREE. So also, Mary is a metaphysical speaker and teacher and internationally recognised as Australia's leading UFO and contact phenomenon researcher. She is also a guest speaker in international universities and medical conferences and features in documentaries. We're delighted to have you join us this evening, Mary. That's an amazing profile, I must say. So how are things with you right now?
Busy as always. And as we've spoken before with all of this, Jude, is I think that what is really going to be interesting to all of those that join us tonight is the fact that so many people now are owning their experiences and waking up to the fact that this is relevant to them. And if anything is exciting, it's the fact that there is more and more openness than there's ever been into accepting this as a reality.
Definitely, I totally agree. I would say everyone, pretty much without doubt, would have had some paranormal experience in their life, whether they choose to own it or not. Lifting the square box and peeking outside or jumping out, depending on how they're feeling inside. I'd say most people would have had a paranormal experience, and the UFO experiences particularly are fascinating, and as we know, have been going on for centuries, but coming more to the fore now. And people, like you say, are waking up to what we're experiencing now, and learning more who we truly are within that process. Would you agree with that, Mary?
I absolutely do, Jude. And what is interesting now is that we're brought that, the ufologists have been very much nuts and bolts in many ways. They've always stuck with what they have seen as the photographs, the time, how many saw it, and to qualify and validate the fact that it's real. But what a lot are struggling, particularly in the UFO field, is the fact that this is more than that. It's actually a life-changing spiritual experience that literally changes their whole perspective on their world, their reality, who they are, what they are. And, this, of course, brings into metaphysics and those of the more spiritual realms. And we're really talking about consciousness. Finally, we're talking about consciousness and how that links to all of this. And it's not just about bright lights in the sky.
No, definitely not. Far more involved than that in most cases, I would think. Could you tell us, please, a little of your life before you moved into a wider perspective of reality, and how did that change happen for you?
Well, that's an interesting one on two levels. I mean, I will say that I was brought up conventionally in a conventional religion, with the standard kind of Christian beliefs and what have you, although not all of them ultimately, as I questioned as I got older. But I think I'm like so many. I've always wondered about the deeper truths, who are we? What are we? What is it all about? And so I would say I've always been a seeker of trying to understand more, particularly when my religion discards reincarnation, and I get more and more evidence that reincarnation is more likely. So you've got those conflicts coming up and what have you. And so for me, I looked, if it was weird and wonderful, I got a book on it always. I was one of those, because that's what used to excite me, the paranormal, the supernormal, or whatever. But I, conventionally started out as a nurse and a midwife. And it was when I was having my children, I got offered the chance to learn about counselling, which was very new 40 odd years ago, that it was still very much what is counselling and what have you. And I didn't really know, but I was offered training. And because I couldn't go back into nursing, I went into counselling and discovered something very vital to me, which was, instead of dealing with health the way it's done in most allopathic ways, that what's behind it, what is the cause? Why aren't we dealing with the cause of illness? And of course, that was very obvious with people with, grief, with all these different issues, how they affected them emotionally and physically and what have you. So I got more and more interested, but also amongst all of that, particularly when I moved to Australia in 1991, was I got involved in grief and bereavement. And with grief and bereavement, people are asking you, what do you believe? Is there life after death? People who had not thought about it even, but also people having, in deep grief, having strange, weird and wonderful experiences, feeling mums by the side or dads guiding them in some way and what have you. So proof of an afterlife was already in the testimony that I was hearing and what have you. And I've always been, believed that there was life after death anyway. My mum was brought up Catholic, but she used to go to the mass in the morning and the spiritualist church in the evening and not having a problem with it. You know what I mean? It was like, it's all what she said, it's all God, Mary, you know, and I absolutely got that, you know, but to get to where it brought me now, certainly when I was a nurse and a midwife, I would never in my wildest dreams have thought I would be traveling the world talking about aliens. But it's like everything, the synchronicities. And during that time of working as a counsellor in a recognised counselling agency, and I was offered the chance to learn about, you know, more about healing, to learn about our multidimensional selves. And while I'm exploring that, I'm also reading more books. And two of them came up. And one of them was Dr. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist, that talked about abductions and the reality of this, you know, that people did have an experience, that it was real. And he'd done all the psychological testing. And I read another book, which was by Whitley Strieber, Communion, which everyone knows, the classic, you know, with the E.T. face on the front. And I picked those books up just, oh, it's interesting, it's different, I'm going to read it, you know, because I knew nothing about this particular experience at all. And when I read them, literally within a few weeks of reading them, my first client came through the door. His name is Ellis Taylor. He lives in England now. He's written several books himself. And he said, look, I've heard you're open-minded. For this, there's no support groups. For this, they just think you're crazy. And used to wake up with marks on his body, knowing he'd been taken up on craft. His partner was having experiences. The children were having experiences. It was pretty obvious, you know, that it wasn't just one person. If it's the whole family, then something very real is going on. And he said, nobody comes to the house because they think it's demons. Very classic in that sense, that people don't understand and then put it all down to, you know, ghosts or spirits or demons or whatever it was. And the bottom line was that started me on this journey, because I'd read those two books and I never thought I'd ever come across anyone who'd had experiences, because I thought, oh, it's bound to be quite rare. 2 weeks later, another lady comes through the door. She's having experiences. And literally, when I first started my first support group, within a few weeks of that, with another social worker who'd had experiences, 12 people turned up. And I thought, this is in Perth. And I thought, 12 already? How, you know, what does that actually say about what's actually going on, you know, with people, that there's already that number? And of course, since then, I found there were hundreds in Perth that were having experiences as I went on. And so that's a really edited version of part of my journey. Was also opening up to all of this through the group that I belonged to, where I was learning about energy healing, where I was learning about opening up to what I call the non-physical team, to understanding how people get downloads and operate multidimensionally and get precognition, telepathy. All those kind of things started to branch out as I experienced things myself, because I was being shown that we can all do that. These are abilities we're all born with. And for many of us, we think you have to be gifted to do such a thing, when in the bottom line is, no, you don't. You just have to be reminded of how it works, because everyone can do it. So when I work with people, I'm very much in line with, you know, that understanding. Because when I talk to people and I send them a questionnaire, they're ticking off the boxes that make sense to them, but it's also telling me how open they are multidimensionally. You know, do you feel presences in the room? You know, do you get information in your head that you've not learnt, for example? How do you understand yourself? And many of them will say, I don't feel I belong. It doesn't feel like home here. You know, I feel like I've been adopted, is one of the favorites, because I don't feel the same as my siblings or whatever. I've always felt different. Things on this planet don't make any sense to me, is another one. You know, I feel like it's very dense, and it's you know, they feel that their bodies feel very dense, and that they've got something to do. They've got a mission or a purpose or whatever, all these kind of things, but they've not been able to put it into a box where they can actually understand why they feel like that. And to give you an example of just what was it, a day ago or 2 days ago, another lady from Europe was saying to me, her son, who's 4 years old, said, you know, you're not my real parents. And that
I've
is,
heard that quite a lot. Heard that quite a lot.
you know,
Yes.
this is all the indicators. So
Yes.
how did I get into it? I think we all have a soul mission. And I think I've been led into this without realizing, just with a curiosity, you know.
And I think this is how it works, Mary. This
Yeah.
is how the whole thing works. And the synchronicities of you reading those books when you did, while
Mm.
you're doing all of this remembering through this group. And then all of a sudden you have clients coming with conditions that are along those lines. I mean, how cool is that? It's like the universe is just opening up more and more for learning on both sides, which
Yes.
is fascinating.
Mm.
All for growth, for learning, for understanding. And actually, one of the questions I wrote down here is I'll actually say it now because it fits. Earth doesn't feel like home. Beam me up, Scotty. There are many of us here that
Yeah.
can relate to this statement. We are the star seeds, the travelers, the ones that came to raise frequencies
Mm.
and hold the light. Would you talk about this topic, please, as we've started on that subject and why the world seems foreign?
Well, I think the first thing that is really interesting is that they say this doesn't feel like home. And many of them, if you push a little bit, they don't always like to say it because they don't want to sound crazy. Well, they'll say, I think I came from another planet. You know, I'm probably, you know, I'm an alien or something, you know, and I'll say, well, is there any particular star system that you feel you might connect to or feel connected to? And they say, well, to be honest, I think it might be the Pleiades, or it might be Orion, or it might be Sirius, or it might be Lyra, or whatever. And they have this knowing, this sense that there's a connection to that particular star system, or they may say, I came from another dimension. And I always remember this 10-year-old in England saying that he came through a portal in the sun. But I've had others that say to me, it's not a planet that's in this universe, it's from another dimension. And others have talked about that as well. And when I was talking to a 10-year-old who lives in Western Australia, and he was saying he comes from a planet and he's a blue being. And he said that he's come as a first incarnation to this planet. His mother's been here many times, so he picked a mum that was already knew how it worked on the planet. And he said, I'm a center seed and I'm here to connect to the center of the planet because I'm going to be helping with all the pollution and what
How
have you.
beautiful. How
You know,
beautiful.
this is the awareness that the new generations of human that I talk about in the new human, because
Yeah,
it's not, you know, just a one-liner here. We're talking about them having a deep understanding of themselves and their abilities and their awareness and why they're here. This isn't, you know, just as I say, the odd little statement. It's a real knowing of who they are.
absolutely. You're known as the Star Lady, I believe, with your wonderful work with hypnotherapy and the
Mm.
ability to allow clients to tap into their innate knowing. Could you talk about this, please, the aspects of our multidimensional selves and how using your higher dimensional team, who I would like to acknowledge, has helped you in this unfolding of your profession?
Well, as you know, once you start saying that you can tap into things, people look at you a little bit different. So I have to be very judicious, and a lot is about language, isn't it? If you
Yes.
say someone is psychic, they go, "Oh, it's one of them," you know. But if you say that, you know, they've got a healthy intuition, you know, and they sense things and feel things, and that's okay, isn't it? You know, it's so I've learned to be very careful about my language, whatever. But what I discovered when I worked in a group for 3 years, and they were all very, what I call very grounded people, you know, two of them were psychologists. So I was going crazy with a good set of people. You know, I had things happen that I absolutely know only happened because it was real, because there was no other way. And I had so much proof of that, so many different ways. But I didn't know what I was going to be doing with it, even though I ended up training to other groups for a couple of years and what have you, still doing my hypnosis and still working with that. But finding out when I was doing hypnosis that it was actually going to another level. And that was really strange to start with because I didn't know what was actually happening until I kind of worked it out. For example, I might take somebody into a place where they're seeing things and experiencing things, and I would be getting things come to me about that. And I think the thing that really knocked me for six once was there was a young graphic designer that had gone into a space where he was seeing himself as a grey being. And he said, we're moving something big from one dimension to the other. And in my head, I got, it's a planet. And he says, it's a planet. And we've moved it from one dimension to the other too fast. And we've messed up its energy. Now we've got to rectify that. So he's talking almost like a creator being.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
but not only that, the image, and because he was a graphic designer, he actually drew what he was seeing. Well, that was what I was being shown. So I realized that hypnosis can take you, the facilitator, into the same frequencies.
Yes, absolutely.
So tap into.
So you're tuning in to
Yes,
what's happening in the moment with the energy of that other person.
exactly. And one of the things that I've trained some hypnotherapists to do is to do exactly that, because when you know how it works, you then understand the experiencer who is opening up. Always they're opening up multidimensionally, because that's part of what contact does. It opens you up to your clairvoyance, your clairaudience, your clairsentience, and all these other different awareness. It actually is instigating a big psycho-spiritual change. If you don't understand how that works, it's much harder for you to be able to assist them. If they're struggling with that, they may say, but I don't know what to do with it. How do I manage it? Because they've got all this new info coming in on all those levels. And it's like, well, it's all exciting, but what do I trust? How do I know where it's from? How do I manage it so that I don't go crazy, or people start to think I'm crazy? So if you have worked on yourself so that you know how it works, you can then show them and give them tools to have confidence and work with it, because I believe we're all heading for an interaction with these cosmic intelligences from all over the different universes, to work telepathically with them as part of the galactic community. That's the next step. It's not just a recipient of their information and their help and their downloads and their,
Totally.
we are actually meant to be raising our awareness to the point where we can interact with them.
Definitely see them, interact with them, collaborate with them, create with them.
That's exactly right. And that's
brilliant.
What I've always sensed. And so a lot of my work really is about, when I'm working with someone, I said you can find out through hypnosis what's going on there. But if you want to do it consciously and find out where that information comes from, I can show you how to do that. Which one do you want? Because one of them will continue to expand with that, and you won't need a facilitator ultimately. Once you know, it's like riding a bike. Once you know how to ride the bike, you don't need someone to show you every week. Once you need to be more competent with riding and being able to trust it and have confidence in it. So a lot of my work is giving simple tools so that they feel they are confident then to continue to expand, which is what is going on, I think, across the planet.
That is beautiful, Mary. And I think you would be one of the mainstays of, as I understand it from my studies, of teaching this stuff. I wouldn't imagine there'd be many tutors out there that have been as in depth as you are with the knowledge you have gained, and then are able to bring that forward to teach it to others. And I think that's blimmin' marvellous, actually. It's brilliant that you're able to pass these tools on. And it's like the ripple effect, isn't it? The more people you can teach, it ripples out and then becomes part of the collective at the end of the day. And we are moving into high energy times. We're moving into a time where we're pulling in more of who we are into this physicality, emotionality, mentality, if that's the word, the whole of our being. And collectively, we are upgrading.
Well, it seemed to me that was going to be more useful than, doing, and I'm not decrying those that people go to get help, intuitive help and what have you, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah.
Very nice. And not everybody is ready to take that responsibility on to start with or whatever. But it seemed to me, once I saw how easy it is The only thing is our own old programming that says you can't do this, it's not safe, or you're crazy, or you're going to do something wrong, or you're going to be attacked. All this kind of doubting programming that is being blasted at us right from the moment we're born, through education, through religion, through all these different belief systems and whatever. If we can let go of that and understand it's actually a kind of simple psychological mechanics, and I was explaining to you the difference, how you know the difference between 3D and multidimensional and imagination. And once you know the difference and how each one is a different process, and you can isolate that, then you know exactly what's going on. You can then be sure and confident about the information that's coming to you, and that for me it's about not complicating it and showing actually how simple it really is.
Yeah.
And I know that so many people said, I didn't realize it was that easy.
Wow.
And I said, but you're born with it. I said, do you have to learn how to breathe? No.
It's
So
interesting. It sounds to me, Mary, like you've got feet on the ground, so you're grounded, but I won't say head in the clouds as such, but you are opening up to all potential at the same time as being grounded here. Would that be a correct statement?
I think I make a big statement in the sense that I've always been, I think, pretty grounded. And that was why I struggled when I found that I was opening up, because I thought I was far too normal, quote, ex-nurse midwife, very and whatever. This can't be happening, what? But because of my kind of 3D analytical mind, I wanted to know how it worked. I wanted to know the process, not enough to experience it. I wanted to work it out so that I could understand it and understand the process and what have you. And so with everything, if I get new information, I'm saying, okay, now show it to me. Help me understand why it's this. And whenever I've done that, it's like in the book, the New Human, when I started to isolate ADHD and Asperger's and autism, and I think actually now bipolar is possibly another one. But anyway, I'm looking at that and thinking, why is it when we know intergenerationally we're getting a certain genetic line that is having contact? So if fathers had experiences, it might be grandfather or grandmother, depending. And going down, why is it that all these children now are manifesting a label that says they're dysfunctional? Because it didn't make any sense when all these children were opening up to, yes, I've got a special friend, I can talk to animals, or I can, all this kind of stuff. So what's this label really saying? And one of the clues was really interesting, with a gentleman called Neil Gould, who lives in Hong Kong. And I went there and I presented over there. And he said, Mary, I didn't know I was ADHD until in my 50s. And he said, and I've had interactions with the light beings. He said, but what I realized was that I saw more of the matrix, more of the greater reality through my ADHD. And he retranslated it, always dialed into higher dimensions, because that's actually what the ADHD is. They're already at a more expanded awareness. And the reason they can't be programmed is because of that. The only way they can get programmed is if they lower their frequency,
put them on Ritalin,
them on something, so that then they can be programmed. So my feeling was very clearly that these intelligences realize it's the programming that shuts us down, 3D programming. So make it harder to program. And so you've got the Asperger's, you've got the ADHD, you've got all these other ones. And that made perfect sense, because I've discovered that all of those certain labels are actually hiding sometimes amazing abilities.
Yes.
And when you start to find out they've got certain talents, extraordinary talents in certain areas. I'm not talking about, the autism that's caused by other things. We know what that is. But the ones that are, because a lot of them are genius, absolute genius. And so that's where, the New Human, and what I tried to do was working with Dr. Lena Olsen, who's a molecular biologist in Sweden, who had this label herself, and so did her family. She found out better ways of helping ADHD. by giving them certain, choline is particularly one, that certain minerals and certain vitamins help to stabilize the ADHD, and you don't then have to resort to the drugs that they're I mean, sometimes 4 or 5 years old, even younger. They're putting, how can that ever be a good way? How can that ever
Exactly.
it, as an ex-nurse, I'm pretty, it's been useful to understand the damage certain
Yes.
things can do. And you're putting them on at what? 3,
Mm.
5 years old? What on earth are you thinking?
Poor little kids.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So we're putting in a solution, as well as these are talking about coming from other planets, being taken and shown things. I remember an 8-year-old explaining to me, she was a delightful little girl. She knew I was talking to her mum in the US, and she said she wanted to tell me that she'd been taken a few days before, 2 nights before, taken to a planet and shown how to levitate and shown how to use her abilities. And she said, and then she was shown how they genetically engineered different species. So she was shown how they do that with the DNA. And then she was told they take these different types of from the genetic makeups and apparently seed other planets with them. So she was saying they create various versions to seed other planets. It's an 8-year-old having full recall.
That is amazing.
And that's what I mean when people say to me, well, perhaps the mother or the father or, seen it in a cartoon. I said, this is not stuff you get on telly. And every time when I've asked the parents, they say, I've never said anything about this. I didn't even have any clue they were having these experiences or whatever, until they started to tell me what was going on.
And to have that recall, Mary, to bring back the consciousness of that experience. How
exactly.
remarkable.
I mean, there's so many, and they go into depth as well. They'll explain what the being was like and what, play. I always remember this 8-year-old that came here. He was telling me about this picture behind me, and that it goes through a portal, and he was explaining what it stood for. And he'd been on a portal like this, he was explaining. And he said that he'd been up on the craft and he'd been with other children. And he was explaining that in this group, there weren't just human children, there were other children that weren't quite human. And I said to him, well, how did you know that they weren't quite human? And he said, because their eyes were different. And he said, and we were learning complex things, that we'd use our mind to create things and learn things. And he said, and we were learning really complex things. So I said to him quite casually, complex things. So what kind of complex things? And he said, it's too complex for you. So I was putting my face pretty, you know what I mean? But what was he said something that was very interesting. So he'd been up there, he said, with 2 of his school friends. So I said to him, have you ever talked about this to your school friends? And he got really agitated and looked at his mum, and he grimaced at her and said, Mum wouldn't let me say anything. And he was saying to me, I was trying to protect him because I didn't know if the children would remember, or they would just think he was crazy or something or other. So she'd been trying to protect him, but he was really annoyed that she wouldn't let him ask his friends about his experiences. And this really highlights the challenges the child has. They're having these experiences and they want to talk about them, they want to share them, they want because they don't see there's anything unusual about them, because surely you see colors around people like I do. Surely you see my blue little friend who follows me and takes me up on the spaceship. So what's the problem, So they can get very upset when they don't realize it's not acceptable in mainstream, and they've got to be very careful about what they say. Other kids make fun of them or laugh at them.
Of course. And I think that's been happening for quite a long time, but maybe more so now because more children are coming through. One of the questions I have here, Mary, is you've spoken of the star children, excuse me, and their amazing gifts for humanity, the indigos, crystals, and others. They are the new humans, conscious, heart-directed, brilliant, and creative. These new waves of children are being born on the planet now. What shifts do you see happening with these new frequency beings incarnate here at this crucial time of change? And how can we make it easier for them?
Well, there's two really good questions in that, as you say. First of all, I think depending on where they're from and their gifts, they will pick the family that works with that, so that they're picking the parents, even though not necessarily always the parents understand, but the grandparent, either the grandmother's into this stuff or the grandfather, and I've had psychologists say they've seen these kids because they've recognized them as being different and whatever. Some of the parents get very conflicted because children aren't dealing very well with conventional schools. They just don't do well and often get bullied or picked on or whatever. So often they end up being homeschooled or whatever as well. I think that the soul has the challenge of the mission. It also has the challenge of accepting that they're in a human form and they have got to live with the environment as well. So I think they obviously pick those around them that can support them through that as much as possible, depending on what their mission is and what process is theirs. So I think that's what the soul often does. But I have seen when this gets more accepted, and I'm being amazed at how many people resonate to my Weird and Wonderful book, because I thought it's only going to be the weirdos that are going to read that one. But it's been clinical psychologists, it's been teachers and educators, as well as parents. So it's definitely showing a shift in the planetary consciousness for that to happen alone.
Absolutely.
But what I have seen around that is, and what I would love to see more of, are environments where these children are supported.
Totally.
Where they're given all the, to keep them healthy, and to be in an environment that's accepting. But they've come in as the teachers. So they're there to teach us, not the other way around. And that's going to be a big one for the older generations that think, well, we're going to tell them how it all works. No, we're not. They're going to tell us what they need to be what they, so that they can do what they've come here to do. And
which is brilliant, isn't it? Isn't it brilliant?
Yeah, we're going to be told and shown. What we must do is make sure they eat properly and sleep properly, and do all the things to keep them healthy. But they'll be saying, this is what I need, this is what I have to do, this is how I understand it, and whatever. And for us then to provide the right environment. And I believe that will happen at some point, that we will have those kinds of environments where they are supported through, especially their younger years, until they get old enough to be more independent and what have you. They will need that, and they will need that support and that encouragement, and for us to know what to listen for as well, because just a few days ago, a lady had a daughter with night terrors, not always knowing what's behind those night terrors, for example. And some people may, and even older people that have had experiences, may find they've always been scared of clowns, Santa Claus, skeletons, or owls with big eyes, or whatever. All can be screen memories.
White balloons.
Yeah, all sorts of different ways the screen is for the beings. And so the more that we can educate, the more that we can disseminate, the more people can actually work out what's actually going on and connect the dots, and also help the children. And there are many ways that they can. Often, some children are not scared at all. It's only when their parents are scared, because the parents say, I don't like this happening to my child, or what have you. And I'm saying, well, actually, that it's the child's soul that's part of this, that's undertaken to come in this way and interact in this way. And as I mentioned to you when we had a chat, when I take somebody into an experience where they're dialoguing with the beings, I ask them, have they on any level consented to this experience? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, yes, before I came here, which completely turns it around from being, I'm the victim here, but actually on a soul level, our experience is as part of the soul journey. It's, and what have you. I said, if you want to change your mind, well, then you've got to work on that level and say, no, it's not okay now, or whatever. But it's all about you making the choices and you realizing that. But what I did find more and more is what people thought happened, because they were in fear and anticipated something terrible. Often when they were on board craft, they realized what they thought was a terrible thing that was going on was often a healing procedure. And what we discovered with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, when we did the surveys of 4,200 people, 50% of those surveyed, there were 600 questions, 50% of those surveyed had healing procedures on board craft. 50%. And the other important fact here was when we asked them about their feelings about contact, even though they might have been fearful to begin with, 85% had a psycho-spiritual transformation where their whole perspective changed. They had opened up. They realized the whole purpose of their interactions, many of them understanding why it happened the way it happened and whatever. So only 15% were still in the fear and saw it as a very unpleasant thing or whatever. But what those listening to this may not understand, there's a program on this planet that is also to blame for a lot of the fear-based abductions, and it's to do with humans and deep state, military, MyLab. And
Absolutely.
most traumatized have often been victims of MyLab, not from their ET interactions. That's not to say that there aren't some groups that have a more self-serving part in all of this, but that's an important figure to find out that 85% would not have changed their experience for anything after they understood what was going on. So that's important.
And I think too, for the parents of young ones going through that, obviously not wanting their child or children being traumatized, it would relax their minds somewhat knowing that this was a pre-planned contract, and then maybe can understand a little bit more what's happening.
Well, so often not all the children are actually traumatized at all. There are many of them that talk about the bright light coming in, their friend, their little blue friend or whatever, taking them up, and they're flying spaceships and they're learning things, and they're like this 8-year-old talking about levitating, another one talking about being shown Mars and talking about what's on Mars and what have you. There was no trauma there. It's just that, if anything, I just want to tell my story, and mum listens, or mum and dad listens, and don't laugh at me or tell me that I'm stupid or silly or whatever. Often it's about, because often the parents say, what can I do? And I said, the most important thing you do is listen, so that when they want to talk about it, they know you're hearing them, and that you want to hear them, so that they don't feel shut down. Because a lot of the time there's been parents too scared to listen, and they shut the child down, and the child then is doubly isolated and they don't know what to make of it. But often our fears are translated onto the children as well.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I remember doing a regression to a beautiful lady in her 60s, and her whole family had been taken up in a spaceship. Daughter and grandchildren had all been taken up, and the car. This was in the UK, and when I was in the UK, she'd asked if I'd do a regression with her, and particularly her grandson. This is quite some years ago now, and I always remember her saying, "I've spent my life in fear." And I said, "So are you ready to do this regression then?" Because she was, I think, in her middle 60s. And she said, "I've got to find out what it is." So I actually took her, and I said, "I want you to go to the origin of your fear." And she went right back to a 2-year-old in a cot. And she said, and I said, "So what's happening?" And she said, "Well, I think it was 2 or 3 beings were standing there by the cot. I think they were, I can't remember I think they were mantis beings or something." And so I said, "So what are they doing?" And she said, "They're just observing me." And I said, "Have they done anything to you? Are they doing anything?" She said, "No, they're just observing me." So I said to her, "So they haven't hurt you?" She said, "No." So I said, "So it was just that they were looking at you?" She said, "Yes, and that scared me because I didn't know what they were or why they were there." And interestingly, the fear that she'd had from that moment had been an energy that she'd kept on her back. And we did some metaphysical work on that. And she came out of it and she was almost dancing around the room. She said, "I can't believe all my life I've held on to that fear, because actually," she said, "they've been helping me all my life and I didn't realize."
That's a remarkable story in itself, isn't it?
Well, it demonstrates that we can often carry the fear without understanding what
Yes.
fear is. And for her, it was just that they were strange beings standing by her cot and she didn't know what they were
Yes.
doing, but they didn't
Wow.
do anything. So when somebody says, I'm terrified of finding out, often there's a completely different story because
Yes.
we imagine and we create fear. And because we're scared, well, it must be bad. I had another very interesting one, and this was quite significant because he wasn't afraid of being on board craft. He was quite comfortable with all of it, except for one thing. And I said, well, what is? He said, I've got to get rid of this one thing I fear. And I said, so what is it? And he said, there's this big eye that comes towards me, this big, big, big black eye. And he said, and I just go into shock, and I'm absolutely terrified. And I said, so what do you think happens? And he said, I think they're going to take me over or something. He said, but I don't know. But he was very courageous and he wanted to explore it. He wanted to make sure he knew why he was scared, because he was one of those that wanted to expand. So we did this process where gradually he was allowing this eye to come closer and closer, and he was getting more and more freaked out. And it was so fascinating because one minute he's getting really freaked out, it's getting closer, it's getting closer. And then all of a sudden his whole body relaxed. And I said, so what happened? And he said, he says, they're just giving me information. So the eye was projecting information to him, but he thought they were taking him over. And after that, the fear was gone.
Wow. That's fascinating. Mary, have you found out about other cultures, off-worlders, what part they are playing in the evolution of the galaxy or the universe, or with our unfolding and awakening?
Well, it's a good question because, as you know, my background is, I've wanted to understand who are we? And as one 8-year-old told her mum, we're the aliens. I think it said it pretty clearly. But looking at the DNA, for those that want to know, for me, it was really important to see where this all links up to our history and our heritage, because we're lied to on so many levels. And I'm sure anyone listening to this interview will actually recognize there's so much we're not told. The DNA tells it all, really, because it's our DNA that shows evidence that we have been created an intelligent design. Many different intuitives and others have been told that there's at least 12 different species that have been part of our makeup as Homo sapiens sapiens. Some say even more than that, and maybe with the new generations of human, there are even more of that as well, because there's a new type of hybrid, I believe, as well. I believe we're all hybrids to start with, and that our progenitors are many of the so-called gods of old. That and one I talk about this in my book about a young man from India, and it's so powerful because he said, Mary, I'm a star seed, and I know I'm a star seed, he said, but my countrymen, they have at least 100 gods and they worship them, he said, but I know they're all extraterrestrials, he said, but I can't say anything because my family and my relatives wouldn't understand because they still worship them. He'd put the nail on the head, is that we have been visited throughout history by the so-called gods. And I mean, we've had those that have obviously cohabited and bred in Egypt. We've heard about the gods and the hybrids and the ones that they kept to themselves and what have you. All along, if you look into it, we've got the bloodlines, and we know that there are certain bloodlines that are more connected to these intelligences and whatever. So for me, it changes everything, and I'm probably not very popular with someone who's got a particular religious belief, because I'm firmly convinced that all of these religions are created from these intelligences. That's how, and I'm not saying that to offend anyone. It's just my own personal belief. And I've got my Christmas tree with the UFO on the top. So
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
It's just like constantly joining the dots, aren't we? But
Yes.
back to our progenitors, I believe that we were put here. And I mean, it depends on if you're taking it purely from our human container, if you like. But as a soul, I believe we've been to many planets, many universes, and goodness knows what we've been up to in all of those. And we've probably been creator beings. We've been all these different ones.
And also fractals of ourselves, Mary, having all these other experiences in the now moment.
Yeah.
So there's that as well. So we have fractals of ourselves, God knows where.
Exactly. And one of the things they were showing me was it was like, there's your oversoul. And these are all aspects of your soul that are doing things, parallel universes, different timelines, and goodness knows what else we get up to, which plainly we get to bleed through when we go and we have our dreams and we go and have, these different choices that we might have made in a different way or whatever. I think that's probably extremely simplistic, but it's a way, perhaps it's been a way for me to understand a little bit more. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that we're existing in lots of different ways. And even with what they call the past lives, we're told that everything is not linear at all, that it's all at the same time.
Absolutely.
Fine, doesn't it? It's sort of.
And you look at a child prodigy,
Yeah.
so to speak. Maybe a child of 2 or 3 that can play the piano fluently, amazingly, and would say, oh, that's probably a past life, but maybe it's another fractal of that soul. But they're considered genius. And also with the more strands of DNA that some of the children have now, what remarkable talents they have. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Well, what we're seeing now is certainly some remarkable children being born. And it brings to mind one of the ways that we can see how they're bringing in these abilities to activate the rest of us. Any of these talent shows where you've got 8, 9, 10-year-olds singing like 30-year-olds with these incredible voices. And full well they're just bringing in the frequencies. And that's one way they're doing it, because it's outstanding, some of these children and what they're actually doing and saying. And I think that what's happening is, and it was interesting that with the artwork, some of the children, one young man who I write about, he explained to me that he has come from another dimension, and his artwork actually is to trigger perception. So when you look at it, it actually activates you. And he said, and this is why he's incarnated, to create this particular artwork. The story is a little bit more complex than that. And I wrote about it because he'd had these dreams of soldiers from World War I and didn't know why they were coming in dreams when he was a young man. And it scared him a lot of the time, soldiers with missing limbs and what have you. And he found out that one of his ancestors had died in that war. And this ancestor ended up getting born on the day this ancestor had been born. So he literally, on the day, he discovered then it was him. And he then understood through a regression that he had come in with the mission at the time of the World War I. But because of what happened and they couldn't stop it, he wasn't able to carry on his mission. So he's reincarnated now to create the artwork that he should have done at that time, that it didn't happen because of what happened on the planet.
That's so interesting. And I have a family member who, when he was young, very young, had visions of war scenes going all around the room in his bedroom over and over and over. And I would say a similar thing probably, as to being in that time or a family member, but then realizing it was maybe him, and the part he played then. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because in the younger years, we're so much more open to the reality of where we've been and who we are. And it's only as we age and grow up that we have this layering put on us to be normal and in the box, so to speak. But now we're learning to break free from that. And of course, the kids are so much more open as adults. We have to unlearn everything we've learned,
Right, Jude.
basically.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think that what it does is the more that you travel down this rabbit hole, you start to see the connections are so much more complex and multi-layered. And, you know, I've often seen many tie-ins in past lives to other lives on other planets and other lives on, you know, this planet as well, and how that's led them to this point where, you know, they've come in this time with another mission or another purpose or whatever. And also, I'd like to just mention briefly those that, you know, the walk-in souls, because I've met many that have had walk-in souls. And one particular one, I remember many years ago when I was in WA, and it was a beautiful, very elegant, very dignified lady, just an absolutely beautiful soul. And she said I was a walk-in at 3 years old. And I got her to tell me that she remembers being in this huge craft. She was 9 foot tall, blonde haired, and they absorbed food as light, and they were telepathic. And she said, the next thing I found myself in a 3-year-old girl's body on planet Earth. She said, I didn't know how to talk, and I didn't know how to eat. I had to learn how to do those things. She said it was very scary. And she called herself an undercover agent because she said, I go back to my family regularly and I get debriefed. So she's really describing what's going on this planet, what she's experiencing, how she experiences it. But, you know, her origin is certainly not from here. And it's quite interesting with a lot of the walk-in souls. Many of them have come in with a mission. They've walked in.
definitely. It was like they can't wait to go through the pregnancy and the birthing. A lot of them actually come through maybe a bit later in life, I would suggest, so that they don't have to go through all of that growing up to start what they're doing. And just as an aside, probably in Australia too, you have the hairdressers with the boards outside, and some of them say walk-ins accepted or something. And I'm thinking, do they really know what they're saying? You know, walk-ins just come in, sort of thing. So I find that quite interesting because we have another slant on it. But I think the walk-in phenomenon's probably not quite the right word, but the understanding of that is that they have a mission to do, or maybe the soul of the body they're inhabiting, particularly as an adult, has found it too much, too hard. They want out, and the new soul can come in if it's on a similar frequency, maybe a higher octave, to finish out the original soul's journey, karma, and then create their own, of which they came here to do.
I certainly think that might be one of them. Another one may be that they've had an agreement that one of the souls has said, I only need to experience up to this age. And then after I don't need the avatar, then you can actually move in and what have you as well. So there may be a number of different that's worked out.
I would agree. Yes.
And I mean, I don't know, but those I've
that
heard
makes sense.
both types as well. But also the other thing is these new upgrade hybrids that are coming in that are recognizing or saying, I'm a hybrid. Well, I think we're all hybrids, but there is an upgrade of that, which seems to be either that more of their DNA is activated, maybe their Pleiadian DNA or their Arcturian or whatever. And so they're saying that, or it may be that they have an added extra DNA component from not just mum and dad, but from a particular star nation that is actually adding that extra DNA as well. So you sometimes have that kind of hybrid, and they really identify with a particular species or a star origin. All of these different things are actually starting to become more and more normalized, and people are starting to talk about them and what have you. And I think this is quite fantastic, because a few years ago, it was almost, even mentioning that you might have interactions with any kind of being at all was a no-no. And now we're getting all these other understandings about how complex this is and how it's becoming more and more acceptable, especially, and I'd like to lead into the fact the downloads that so many people are getting, where they're downloading these strange scripts and symbols and artwork and languages, the light languages and what have you. And the numbers of people that are doing this now and thinking they're crazy and finding themselves, you know, having to do this writing or whatever. And when people say to me, how do you know that this is all real and they're not making it up? I said, do you think anyone would normally start saying, well, I'm having to do all this strange scripts and I'm coming out with these strange languages? They would do that normally. And I said, and these are often everyday people that say, I don't know whether I'm going crazy or not, but are doing this. And I said, and if anything's evidence of a reality, it's them doing things like this. Excuse me, I need to.
Absolutely. It's really interesting. Dolores Cannon spoke about the 3 waves of new human. And I hear now there is a 4th wave being birthed with the new quantum color in their aura. Have you met any of these beings? And is this what is referred to as Homo novus?
Well, there's one young lady that I mentioned, Lee Capitelli, who calls herself Homo novus. And I met her when she was 19. And she's a fascinating young lady. And she calls herself a Homo novus, and all her qualities, which I've listed in chapter 11, I think it is, some of them are incredible in how she can understand and connect to all sorts of species or different types of intelligences is probably a better word. I don't like the sound of species, does it? Sounds a bit, you know. And the fact is that she can draw them and she knows their personalities. She has relationships with them and what have you. And I suspect there's another lady whose daughter may fit to that a little bit. And you know her about Elsa Dillon and her daughter Gigi, who's drawn about 250 different beings and what have you. Same thing as Leah. So they've come in to assist with all these new generations of human to help us understand and to help to facilitate the right environment so they can be nurtured and help us on this journey to, you know, a new reality, which is where we're going, I believe. Absolutely.
Yes. And in a way, Mary, would you suggest that we're always being upgraded bit by bit by bit by bit? There was a time we didn't see all the colours we do now because the cones in our eyes weren't as developed.
Yeah.
Would you suggest that we've always been in an upgrade mode, or do you think it's happening more now because of the frequencies we're moving into?
It's a good question, Jude. And what I would say is I think these intelligences have been monitoring us and looking at when it's useful to upgrade. And then we've certainly had some upgrades over the centuries, you know, I believe Leonardo da Vinci and others like that, you know, Tesla and a lot of those others were certainly part of seeing where we're going and what we're ready for and what have you. But I think since our technology has got to a point, a dangerous point in many ways, I think this program has been accelerated. I think they've been accelerating it probably for 100 years or more when we started, you know, the Industrial Revolution and what have you, and things started to accelerate. And I think they've accelerated it even more because otherwise you've got a 3-year-old with a loaded gun who doesn't
Yes,
kills and doesn't know.
absolutely.
So they're having to say, we've got to get this species to grow up fast. And I think that what's really interesting, though, everyone that wakes up has the frequencies that they're passing on to others. So it's happening. And I want to say this because I know that it'll be part of something you resonate to and something that I queried at the time because I always question, can't help myself. And I was told by my team, you know, Mary, when you talk about this or whatever, that's activating others through a frequency. So when you know, because, let me back up a bit. I was seeing all these scripts, all these symbols and what have you. And I said, look, what am I supposed to do with them? Because I can't show all of these in my presentations. There's just no way. I'm seeing them, but I'd love to be able to show you my books and books and pages of all these different ones coming from different people. What am I supposed to do with them? And they said, well, Mary, once you've seen them, they're on your energetic hard drive. So that they're absorbed by you, if you like. So I said, oh, yeah. And I said, what then? They said, so when you talk or when you're anywhere, they get passed on.
Oh, wow.
All the frequencies
Wow.
get passed on.
Now that's very interesting, and that kind of makes sense, but that's a
Yeah,
fascinating topic.
but there's more to it. So I actually said, come on, guys, that's a bit fantastical, as I do. And I said, you're going to have to prove that one to me, you see, because I'm a bit of a pain in the neck. So anyway, we're at an expo about a week later, and it's a panel. And I'm sitting there with this panel, and a lady stands up in the audience. And she says, I've got to say this, she said. And she says, Mary, you're sitting there and you're not saying very much, but you're beaming out all these frequencies. And I went, all right, get it.
There's your confirmation.
Okay. But what I want to say to you, the adjunct to that is that anyone that's opening up and is being exposed to this and is being activated is also doing the same thing. All of us are activators. The more we open up, the more we get open up to the frequencies and whatever else we're being given. That becomes part of your energetic hard drive. And wherever you go or wherever you are actually then passing that on to those that are ready to receive it. So we're all acting in that way. It's not just, it's not just moi, it's everyone that is opening up to, and everything that you are honoring and integrating is actually part of that frequency that you are taking with you wherever you go. And people won't realize it, but you're actually, there's an interchange, there's an interaction and what have you.
That's fascinating. So it's like we're in this information sea of upliftment when we come into reasonable close contact with someone that's done it, and it's being passed on to, like the 100th monkey type scenario.
Exactly. So when I've talked about and I've shown video of someone doing the writing and whatever, and they were explaining that once it's done, it doesn't matter if they lose the writing because it's in their energetic field now. It's not lost. It just continues to be part of this energetic field. So nothing is lost, even if you don't have the piece of paper anymore or the drawing or whatever. It's actually done. It's there. It's part of the matrix then. So
this is fascinating.
well, it is because I'm constantly wanting to know how is this all going to work? What's the mechanism? And this is what I've always wanted, when I don't understand, well, why is that? Well, show me. How does that actually operate and whatever? Because I'm not just going to take it and say, oh, I'm going to believe it because it sounds like a nice idea. I'm after being brought up in a religion where I told to believe anything, and whether or not you could believe it or not, I don't do that anymore. I'm saying you're not going to play that game with me anymore. You're going to have to prove things to me. So I've become a bit of a hard nut now, and you can show me that works that way. Come on, otherwise I'm not going to take it on board. So
and I think that's the best way to be, Mary. I think we have to know the nuts and bolts of the whys and the wherefores. I think it's very important, and to have the logical mind with the intuitive, with the opening up, bringing everything together in a unified mind is the way forward. It's being practical, but being all those other things that we can be as well, coming through into our field. I also think attitude and intention is pretty high on the list too, to allow only the best to come through, the highest and the best, which is what I personally do. I won't let just any old thing come in, and working with that to be more who I can truly be, I think is the intent is there, and so be it.
well, it actually resonates with me because that was very clear to me when I was learning how to work this way, is that I won't accept anything but the highest frequencies.
Brilliant.
Compassion, whatever. I'm not interested in any of the lower frequencies at all. This is who I'm pulling in. And I say to people, it's all, as you said, all about intent. that it's like the radio frequency. If your intent is of the highest frequency and the best frequency for all good and what have you, then other frequencies don't stand a chance, because you can't plug into the lower, something of a lower frequency can't plug into you, because it's got nothing to plug into. And I said, because, this is what a lot of people say, well, what if this happens or this happens? I said, if you're in fear, they've got something to plug into. If you're in ego, they've got something to plug into. I said, but when you're coming from that higher frequency where you've let those go, and you're saying only the highest of the highest frequencies you are prepared to accept as an intent, then there's nothing to plug into from those lower frequencies, no matter what it is, whatever.
Totally. That actually leads into my next question, interestingly enough. This often happens when I have guests on there answering the questions before I read out the questions, and I love it. It's that synchronicity.
Yeah.
So we know we're in a temporal war. It's a fight of dark and light. We win by keeping our frequencies high, just what we're talking about, with love, laughter, and peace in our hearts. Would you talk about the upgrading of our DNA through the ascension process and awakening to more of our true potential? We've been told we will go through this process with our physical bodies interdimensionally. What are your thoughts on this change of the ages?
Well, that's a good one. And again, I try and use stories to illustrate where I'm coming from with that. One of the things that was very interesting to me was seeing a film called Lucy, and I don't know whether any of those listening to this have seen it. It's actually about a drug cartel and someone that was given this new type of drug, and it leaked into their system. What this drug did was activate DNA. And so as more of the drug got inhaled from the system, she became more and more multidimensional in nature, to the point where she ultimately became light and was no longer physical. And I found that really interesting film, because what it really does is, to a certain extent, I think, indicate what's going to happen as we slowly activate more and more of our dormant DNA. And we all know that the dormant, or used to be called junk DNA, is about 95% is dormant DNA. They don't know what it is, what its purpose is, or anything else. I will say this to add to that. 1 gram of DNA apparently can take all the information that we know on the internet, can be stored in that 1 gram of DNA. Just think of what we have and we hold that is not accessible to us. But I believe as we become more activated and our dormant DNA is activated, we are going to experience abilities that we have never even realized we had, in a most incredible way. And I think that's really what's happening. But how are we going to manage that when we start to activate all of this? How are we going to manage this new multidimensional reality? My feeling is that a lot of these downloads that we get, where they say, I can't translate that. Some is translatable. Some people can read it and whatever. But some, they say, are like programs, packages of information that one symbol contain a room full of encyclopedias. I believe that's the software for the new upgraded human. And I believe that when we start to activate that DNA and we start to expand multidimensionally, we're going to need a new operating system. And I think that these downloads, some of them at least, are part of that software. I don't know if I'm right, but to me, sort of logically, we need to know how to work that new system, because if we're already struggling to work with our clairvoyance and our clairaudience, and slowly, and still confused about what's real and what's not real, what on earth are we going to be like when we start to see the whole matrix of our greater reality, unless we've got something that enables us to give us an operating system? So I think it's going to be, that's what is part of all these downloads that we're getting. We're being assisted by these intelligences to give us the guidance that we need, because otherwise, we already know, you have a Kundalini awakening, or somebody does, and they can feel like they're going crazy for a while or whatever. That's not helpful. We need to have enough understanding so that we can operate when we start to activate in the way that I believe is going to happen. And I think that that's going to change everything in terms of how we look at things, and on so many levels. When you've got children already and adults telling you that they can communicate with animals, for example, and they're, you used to get these people say, oh yeah, right, okay, when there's so much evidence there is that is a reality. And one of them was from a lovely veterinary surgeon in Chile that contacted me some years ago, and I was doing some work with her, and then she wrote to me a few years later and said, Mary, I want you to put out, she said, as a veterinary surgeon, she said, now the animals tell me, the pets tell me what to say to the owners. And they also, if they've passed on, may have messages for the owners as well. So she acts as a multidimensional veterinary surgeon. That's just the start. That's just the start. When
That's remarkable. Remarkable.
Someone with that credibility.
Yes.
That she's communicating with the animals and the ones that have passed on. And she says it makes so much difference. And I'm really happy to help people that, have lost someone close to them and whatever. So this is what I mean. This is just the start of how we're going to be operating in a completely new way with all of this multidimensional reality. And, the children that talk to crystals and whatever. I always remember this 6-year-old holding a meteorite, and he was explaining what the meteorite was telling him, and he's saying where it landed, and he didn't want people to be fearful of it and what have you. And his mother said to him, so how do you know what it's saying and what have you? He said, well, it's all in my head. It tells me in my head. And that's how he described his connection to the meteorite and whatever. The children are showing us on so many levels.
You can see where they are going to become the teachers.
Yeah.
Because if we are all of a sudden waking up big time and sparking up big time to abilities we'd not previously shown, the kids will probably tell us how to do it. That's and how to be with that and how to navigate through that, which is brilliant. And it gets me back when you were talking about downloads of information to the fire languages, of which Hebrew is one, Tibetan's another, Chinese is another, where one symbol, let's say in Hebrew, of the alphabet, one letter, had a whole download of information in itself.
That's right.
And so the expansion of that on what one could learn, and because they are creator languages, you could create with those languages, with sonics, is quite fascinating. Of course, English is not a 5-letter language, but it's become the universal one, interestingly. But there's just so much for us to learn and to grow into. It makes it very exciting, Mary, doesn't it? When you think of the potentials that will open up in the new way of being, where it brings everyone more holistically together, more collaborative, more together, more cohesive, more loving, more peaceful.
Yeah.
It's going to be beautiful. Yes, there's going to be teething problems, but it's learning. It's all learning. I think it's going to be very, very exciting.
I think it will be too. And I think that we've gone through when things do not work, and we're in that situation where things are not working. And now we need to see as a soul things that are working and what have you. And when you look at the fact that as so many are being born as empaths, if you've got, all of us able to have that ability, you're not going to want to do damage or harm to somebody else, because you're going to feel all of the stuff that they're feeling. You're not going to want to do that. It's like, I don't want to experience that or whatever. And this will be with everything. When we see the full potential of what we're doing and what it means to others and what have you, it's going to change everything in terms of our motivation. And I think it won't be hard for us to get it, because I think we'll get it once we've had those kind of experiences. So that for me is what's so fascinating about it, is how we're going to understand things from this whole different perspective. And I know I honestly believe that we've all incarnated to be part of this new beginning that this is why we've come to the planet right now, and why these, when somebody says to me, well, how do you know? I said, I don't believe all these beautiful souls have come to this planet for a waste of time. I don't believe it. I believe they know that they're here because they know they can make a difference, and they are going to make a difference.
Absolutely. The space arcs are a fascinating topic. Many are located at different locations on the planet, and they're charging up. How do these arcs come into play, if you have heard? Who is operating them? And what is their role? How do you see this unfolding? Have you heard anything about that, Mary?
I certainly have, and I came into the information about the space arcs through a lady who'd had experiences on board craft with what surprised her was some of her close friends, and she had conscious memory of going up on a little craft to a bigger craft with one of her friends, who actually she said she was conscious enough of him saying to her, "Isn't this amazing?" I won't use the fancy term he used, and she remembers that going on there and seeing the beings and seeing some of her friends having procedures done and having procedures herself, being shown some new what is it, certain plants that were going to be gifted to the planet. She was shown certain symbols and whatever, and she was given a message that she couldn't remember. The next day she got phone calls from her friends saying, we had this strange dream, we were on a spaceship and what have you. And it wasn't just one, it was several of them, including this guy who'd been put down 3 miles from where he'd been picked up, and remember saying, isn't this amazing? And what have you. So she had lots of confirmation it was real, but she wanted to know what the message was. So I did a regression with her, and she went back to Atlantis, where they were all there, the ones that she'd been on the spacecraft with, as light workers. And she said, we didn't manage to achieve what we intended to achieve. So we've come back this time because we've got this to do. And in it was being shown again this particular plants. She was shown there was something looked like some strange craft, and she wanted to know a little bit more about all of that. In the meantime, within that time, I was listening to Dr. Michael Sala, and he was talking to a whistleblower, a military whistleblower called JP, who was talking about a craft under the Bermuda Triangle, and was saying that they had got remote viewed this craft, and in it was a conscious craft. There were beings, avatars in there that were huge avatars in stasis, and there were these beings being grown to pilot the ship, and he said they were half grown apparently. She was also shown these plants which were also there, and she was explaining that these plants were a gift to humanity, and they were luminescent. I find this within a week of hearing her story. I didn't know anything about the arcs. So this was a whole new ball game. This was validating a lot of the information that she got. There's a lot more to that. But one of the interesting things was that I said, well, there's another one supposedly in the Buzeti Mountains in Romania that's been found in 2002 or 2003. And there's several books written about it. Transylvanian Sunrise is one of them, with Peter Moon. And what was found there all those years ago was a huge cavern which had all this ancient technology. And it was obviously created by very tall beings, because I think the tables were 7 meters tall and what have you. And then when you walked into it, you could activate things with your hands, and they would show you history and genetic history and all this kind of stuff. Kept very quiet, and there was only a few that know about it. And I think the US and the Romanian government kept quiet about it. And you had to have a certain consciousness to get into the cavern itself. So in the meantime, this lady, who was part of a remote viewing group as well, along with Tony Rodriguez, part of a remote viewing, both went to have a look. I said, well, go and have a look at this other one. Is something there? And they found not only was this cavern there, but there was this huge pyramid, and also another huge craft with these beings in stasis, and more about these plants that she'd seen that were supposed to be a gift to humanity. So there's corroboration again of the same thing. And I only knew about it through the regression, a few weeks prior to that. The information's come through now that there's places on the planet where these arcs are with all this new technology and they're being activated. That's the important thing. I was told there were at least 2 in Ukraine. That's part of the reason there's a real war, is to do with that. Russia, Australia, Brazil, Japan. And the interesting thing about the Japanese one is a gentleman that talks about being shown one of these craft in Mount Fuji. And he was shown,
Could be Jean-Charles Moyen, possibly.
he talked about that. And he
Yes.
said there was a portal to another one. And I'm not sure whether it was in Canada or Alaska. It might have been Alaska.
Also Antarctic and Hawaii.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
We're hearing now of these other arcs, including Iraq. And of course, the bit that was interesting to me was in 2002, when the Iraq war was. This is a personal thing because I never knew why I'd been told this. And it was an intuitive that told me that. She said they've not gone in the way you think it is. It's not about what they were saying. She said there's ancient technology and they want the technology.
Yes. I think there was a Stargate there, Mary.
Yeah. Well, there's possibly also one of these arcs as well, because they ransacked Baghdad Museum.
Yes, they did. That's right.
That's right. And she told me all of this stuff. And I said, well, I'll check it out, because I knew somebody in intelligence that I could call on. And they said to me, don't talk about it, don't write about it, don't phone about it, don't do anything. In other words, keep quiet, Mary. That was in 2002, 2003.
Wow.
10 years, whatever later, 20 years later, I'm not too fussed about that now. But it's interesting how you've talked about it, and I have, about how we're led into information. You put something in a box and you think, well, if I get any more about it, I'll have a look at it again. And then other things link to it and you suddenly get it out again. You say, yeah, hold on a minute.
Yes.
So there seems to be these arcs across the world, hidden probably underwater, like the Bermuda Triangle and other places, that are being activated by consciousness. And at some point, I assume they're going to show themselves. So what does that actually mean to us as a civilization when that happens? And Tony said these beings that were going to pilot the craft in the Bermuda Triangle, he said, were half grown when he looked at them a few months ago. So if it means they're half grown, there's not going to be many months then where they may be themselves.
Fascinating. I find it fascinating. I really do. I think they're there to help. It's going to be extremely interesting, particularly some of these giants in stasis that have been so-called asleep for this time, although I think the avatar's been asleep, but the soul's been out doing other things until this time, where they're being reactivated into the body. It's really interesting.
Or Jude, the other option, and I don't know whether yet to take that on board, is I've met a couple of people that believe that they will be the consciousness that will move into those avatars.
Ooh. Oh, wow. Fantastic. Also, going back to things hidden, as a lot has been on this planet, I was in the Cairo Museum 2000. Oh, can't remember the date now. A few years back. It was the old Cairo Museum, and the 4th floor was locked. You were not allowed onto the 4th floor. There were guards at the door at the bottom level that went up, because apparently there was technology there that people were not allowed to know about. And I was itching to get up there, but of course you couldn't, because there were guards at the door with munitions that you would not get through. So there are so many hidden things. So many.
And that's the bit that I think most of us get frustrated about, is not, that we're not given our true heritage and the truth about all of this. And the big issue I also have is because of the truth embargo, so many people that are having experiences are afraid to talk about it, because they're afraid they're going to be carted off to hospital or medicated. And many, I suspect many millions have, because they've been given a mentally ill label. And when they've just been opening up intuitively and been told they're psychotic or schizophrenic or whatever it is. And yet I've met so many said, I always remember, I wrote about it in Awakening, the little 19-year-old that got in touch with me in Perth, one of the very at my beginning of my work. And she said, I finally realized that I'm having, these abductions, she called it. And she said, and I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I've been seeing aliens all my life. And I told the doctor at 14 that I was seeing aliens. And he said, there's no such thing, and diagnosed me as schizophrenic.
Wow.
On this cocktail of medications. She said, I nearly took my life 3 times. And she said, it wasn't until I saw a talk show on telly from America, she said, where they were talking about this experience, I realized I maybe wasn't crazy after all. And I wrote a case study because it was so poignant. Beautiful young girl, completely messed up chemically now because of all the drugs, and finally realizing that she wasn't crazy after all. And that's just one small snippet of the damage this corrupt has caused, with countless people that have been through the mental health program. Because, and I'm not blaming necessarily the doctors and psychiatrists, because they don't know either.
No, they don't know any better. There could be several reasons for those situations. Maybe with schizophrenia, they could either be hearing voices from other beings, or it may be with the oversoul and what I call the puppets, that maybe the wires have got intertwined for a little bit. So they're hearing another fractal of themselves with communication, and that they think they're going nuts.
I think the whole way that we look at mental illness, or is being looked at from a very 3D, perspective, is actually the problem. Once we acknowledge consciousness, and consciousness being primary, and that we are multidimensional, then there's going to be hopefully a completely different way of interpreting what's going on when people are having certain experiences or opening up multidimensionally. And then we can start finding ways, if somebody is unwell or finding overloaded or other things are going on that tips them over, that we can actually understand the process of what's going on and help them back to a balanced place again, both intuitionally and psychologically and emotionally and spiritually. Once that's, it's like anyone that was psychic, let's face it, was clairvoyant or whatever, was considered, and it's still being said. You take someone to the doctor and they're not very well, they've got, they've been struggling or whatever, and they'll say, are you hearing voices? That's the first thing they get asked. Are you hearing voices? And most people are very clever enough to say, no, I'm not, because they know full well that that's leading. That's the issue. The issue is we have got a very inaccurate way of interpreting people's human experiences, because this is being denied. Multidimensionality is still being denied, that, the credibility that it's real, and that we are in fact multidimensional. And that's the big one for me, is having that completely changed into a real way of understanding who we are. When that happens, and it is, it's consciousness is being explored, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, astral traveling, all these things now, remote viewing, shamanic experiences, healing and activation experience, they are being looked at more and more, and there's more and more credibility coming in with that. But it's still in mainstream within a little, the fact that you start having anything out of the 5 senses and there's something wrong with you is still very much the norm.
Sadly. Would you like to talk briefly, because we're getting on a little bit, about ACERN, Australian Close Encounter Resource Network, that you founded and are principal of? Why did you set up the organisation, and what were the goals, Mary?
Oh, that was very early on, when I was starting out with this social worker, and we started in a support group, because it was obvious to me there were more people having this experience than I realized. And what came to me very clearly is, where do they go? Who do they talk to? If they go to most, psychologists or psychiatrists, immediately they're going to get some kind of label. Not to say that all psychologists are like that. There are some very open-minded psychologists. But generally, where do you go? And I didn't want what happened to that little 19-year-old to happen to others if I could prevent it. So there were two strategies. One of them was I was a professional counsellor, you know, I work professionally from that baseline, but I also can offer them honoring of their experience and their reality, and to help them to understand they're not crazy and what have you. So that it was like giving them somewhere to go. Even if they go to UFO groups, a lot of the time, particularly a few years ago, the only thing that often groups could offer was talking about UFOs, the reality of them, what pictures have you got and whatever. But many of them didn't have proper psychological support. They had researchers to, you know, to look into cases of, you know, this and what have you, but they didn't have the you know, that extra support that I'm having experiences or my kids are having experience. What do I do? Where do I go? What have you? So I thought, well, there's only one way to do that, is to create a professional organization that offers resources, offers, you know, counseling, offers a whole information backup or whatever. But alongside that was when I also decided to write Awakening a few years later, because again, it was for the same reason. Who do they go and talk to? How do they know that, you know, the questions, how do I know I'm not crazy? Why me? What's it all about? What does it all mean? What do I do about the fear? What about my kids? If I'm downloading this stuff, what does it all mean? My abilities, I'm starting to see things and whatever. What do I do about that? So all the questions I put into chapters to give somebody a working manual to take them through their experiences if they had no one to go to, nobody to talk to or whatever. Because the difference was, even with researchers, they're not therapists. They might ask you about your experiences and what you remember and whatever, but they can't help you through missing time, for example, or how do you integrate that in your everyday life? How do you cope with that and understand it? How do you manage that emotionally? You might have a partner that thinks it's all a load of rubbish and laughs at you. You might have the family that are doing the same. And I've met so many that are isolated because the family doesn't want to know. They, you know, they just can't handle it. Often it's because they're fearful or they're not sure whether their partner's crazy or not. And there's all those things that go with it. So my idea has always been, how can I help? What kind of support is useful to you? What is it you need? And can I offer something that will help you integrate this so that you can get on with your life? So
It's
that's,
really interesting. Sorry.
yeah, go on.
It's really interesting. A few years ago, I worked as a holistic health practitioner. And when I first started out, I had a board out on the street, which in part said abductee supporter.
Oh,
And it was interesting, the clients I had that wanted to open up and talk about that type of thing way back then. That would have been in the 90s, actually. Yeah.
very, very early on, still very out there.
Yes. Well, some people thought it was being abducted off the street sort of thing. And I had to say, well, yes, that's true, but it could be a bit more than that as well, which it definitely was, and the intent of it.
What I found more than anything that was helpful was for them to be able to just tell you how it is for them and what's happened. Even if I did nothing else but listen, and just listen without any judgment, that in itself was amazingly healing. But obviously, if I had skills that helped them go one step further, which is, let's look into this. Do you want to find out more or whatever? That was when hypnosis was a really useful tool, because most times it helped them enormously with connecting the dots. So listening, if that was just that, it would have been enough. But
Absolutely.
for others, there's, I want to know, I want to understand or whatever. So that's how it started.
That's brilliant, Mary. Is there anything you or your team would like to impart at this time as a closing comment, or what you would like to share with everyone?
Well, first of all, there's an acknowledgement of all the wonderful work that you're doing in
Thank you.
putting information out there and working in a way that's helping so many through offering this format to, you know, help people connect the dots and whatever. And that in itself is so invaluable, and you probably will never know how many people you help and how many people you support by doing what you're doing. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. And I'd like to say to everyone that's listening, honor your truth, honor your resonance, honor your knowing, because nobody knows more than you do about you and your reality. And start to trust the knowing, the sensing, the feeling, because all of that is multidimensional information. And the more you listen to that, the more you're likely to be in track and actually be all that you're meant to be, because that will guide you better than anything.
Thank you, Mary. That's so beautiful. Thank you. Are you open to having a few questions before we close, or do you think you've done enough for the evening?
Oh, I can answer a couple of questions before my voice gives up.
Okay. So I'm just going to put you onto a bigger mode so I can see everybody. So if someone has a question, could they please raise their hand? Hello, Lou.
And thank you very much for such a interesting, enlightening, and beautiful conversation, Mary. It's just incredible. It did resonate with me all along 100%.
Oh, thank you.
I would ask you a zillion questions, but I have one that is to me very important, and that is, how do you define, or how can you explain or describe consciousness? That's one. And the second would be, how I'm curious on finding out what would be the tools that you would use in order to enhance our capabilities. You said that it's very easy. So which tools would you give for those in need to find out their capabilities?
Well, I'll keep this as, in terms of consciousness, there's a lot of wonderful people that probably describe it a lot better than I can. I'm a very simple soul. The way that I understand consciousness is the part of us that's connected to the source, that is all knowing, all aware, all connected, and what have you. And we are aspects of that. So that, to me, that's what consciousness, I feel we're all connected to the source, and that consciousness is that intelligence, that energy, that frequency, that's as near as I can describe what I think consciousness is, because I know it's not just inside here, that it's something that's part of everything, and that we tap into it. And the more that we honor that, the more we're able to do, the more we're able to tap into it, because it's all a frequency that we're all connected to. So that's as much as I can understand. It's a field that we all tap into, and that's about as technical as I'm likely to get. So how do we do that? By making a decision that that's what we now wish to do. So it's about and when I work with someone who is starting to feel presences, starting to see energy, starting maybe to see orbs of light, or getting downloads, my first question is, so where is this coming from? Is it coming, how do you understand how you're able to get information, what have you? And they say, well, it might be my higher self. It might be my guides, or, my life guide, or whatever, or I call it my non-human team, or, these other intelligences that we connect to, and what have you. I said, well, okay, if you're ready, then you can talk to that superconscious self and say, I'm now ready to be more connected and more, and ask for more clarity, so that you release all the old programs that have got in the way. And I take them through a particular meditation that I use. It's called I don't know what word you'd call it, a defragger of the superconscious, if you like, for want of a better computer word. So it's an instruction to the superconscious to release all programs, all limits, all blocks, all implants from this lifetime or any other, from both their physical and energetic bodies. And then I help them to realign their energy systems. When they come out of it, we call in the team and we ask for, what's the energetic signature of my life guide? Because we all have one that's there all the time. You want to know what they look like, why they're with you, how many lifetimes, what do they offer you? And this way you start to then be more conscious about having an interaction with whatever that intelligence is, whether or not it's an aspect of you, and it may very well be, or it may be your superconscious giving you something like that to work with to access that information. But what you're doing is really saying, I want all the limits that I've had up to now to be released so I can finally have clarity. So you're really talking to your oversoul and you're saying, this is what I want now. This is my intent. And from that, then you can call in whatever way you want to work with that new freedom. And it can be through guides, through different spirits. And I can show someone how to work with their clairvoyance and their clairaudience to have a dialogue. And for some, it may not be so easy to see, but they may feel and sense it. Once you start working with the feeling and sensing, gradually the rest of you will start to open up more and more. And ultimately, you will function more and more in that multidimensional realm. But first of all, you've got to honor it. You've got to accept that, you know, that this is part of your experience, because if you're still in denial, some people say to me, how do I know it's not my imagination? And I said, the first thing you need to know is with left brain, you think before you speak. Right brain, you speak before you think. It's the complete opposite. So if you're starting to edit something, you're getting in the way of the clarity of that data. So it's literally the opposite. So with left brain, you think before you speak. Right brain, you speak before you think. Once you've got that and a handle on that, people say to me, well, how do I know it's not my imagination? I'll say, because in your imagination, let's put it this way, if something's a reality, like your room that you've got there, you know immediately in your mind's eye that's real. You know where the door is, you know where the windows are, you know what's on the walls. That's a reality. But if I said to you, create a room that you'd like to be in, you'd have to think about, how would I create it? How big would it be? What color would the walls be? Where's the windows? Creativity is not the same process as intuition, because it requires you to think about it to create something. Whereas when you're getting a download from your superconscious higher self, when you get that, it's instantly in your head. It's there before you have a chance to think it. It's only the thinking that gets in the way and colors it. So it's actually really simple once you get a handle on it. Once you know the mechanism, it's really very easy because you don't have to think. It's there. Just like your sensing and your feeling and your knowing is just instantly there. You know, you don't think, well, I've got to feel this, or I've got to sense it. It's either there or it isn't there. And it's there without thought. It's there as you're tapping into your multidimensional information. And once you get to know how it works, then it's actually really very straightforward. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't be more in agreement with you. And lastly, I would like to confirm to you, for your knowledge, that what you said about Iraq and the museum, I can confirm because I was there right after, and I saw exactly what you mentioned it. So all the things that disappeared, the window where they had the things to be exposed and broken and so on, closed doors, and all these things. I saw it when the museum was not open to the public, right after.
Wow.
So it is true.
Gee, well, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Lou. That's priceless. Thank you for your questions. Talina, how are you?
Good, thank you. Look, I think Lou just asked my questions. Yeah, it's kind of like how do we make the invitation? But I think, Mary, you've answered that already. Yeah, but I just yeah, I struggle with intuition. I have been labelled an overthinker, I'm very into details, and yeah, so just kind of letting it go and letting intuition come through is a bit of a struggle.
I'll tell you, Michael,
Um,
it is for all of us to start with, because we're taught to think before we speak. That's the
Yeah.
programming, isn't it? You don't say anything just without thought about it or whatever. So we're doing to do this, you have to do the complete opposite, which takes a bit of trust too, because
Yeah.
whenever I've done that and come out with something, I don't know if it's going to make any sense or not, because I haven't been able to work it through cognitively. So it's a bit scary, because it could be a load of rubbish, couldn't it?
Absolutely, it could be.
Thank
But
you.
I look forward to having. I mean, I've spotted the odd thing here and there, but yeah, a real experience would be something special. Anyway, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Talina. Karen. Mary Karen is my daughter.
Oh,
So I'd
right.
like to introduce you to Karen.
Hello, Karen.
Hi, Mary. I was so excited to hear when Mum was interviewing you. I've been wanting to meet you for such a long time. I'm absolutely just amazed with what you do and what information that you can bring out and how you help people. It's absolutely incredible. Thank you. I don't actually have any questions tonight. It was more of a thanks and acknowledgement than anything else. I really resonate with everything that you're saying tonight. Both Mum and I, we've had so many experiences ourselves, and so yeah, I can really relate to a lot of what you say. And also when you mentioned earlier that that as you're talking, you actually are activating people. Yes, you did. Thank you. I had my ground chakra was fully open and stuff was happening. Tonight.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just about giving you gratitude, just saying thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. And your mum's doing a wonderful job, and I'm sure you're joining her in it as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mary, I want to thank you so much for an incredible evening. You just blow me away with your integrity, your depth of knowledge, your ability to help so many people. It is just mind-blowing to the depth that you're able to go to. So I want to thank you so much. Also, beg your pardon.
Keep going.
Where can people find you and what do you offer?
Well, you just have to Google this weird and wonderful alien lady called Mary Rodwell. I'm on Facebook, Telegram, and also obviously Messenger. Really, my website's acern.com.au, thealienlady.com.au, maryrodwell.com.au. All of them will lead you to me if you're meant to come to me. And because I say that because some people have had the odd dream where my name's come up and they didn't even know I existed. So that's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
so anyway, I'm being facetious now a little bit. Look, I'm easy enough to find. Any of my websites or whatever will find me, and I'll be very happy to hear from you if there's any way I can help. And I can help with your experience if you're having experiences and you're wanting to find out more about if you had missing time, or you want to find out whether you're having contact or your children are having contact or whatever. And also if you are finding yourself, experiencing multidimensional things that are worrying you, or you're getting downloads, or you're wanting to know how to manage it better, or you want to work more actively with your higher self or your team, I can help you with tools to do that so that you can feel more confident. And whatever else comes up.
Whatever else comes up at the moment.
Probably more, as they say. That's an English one.
Well, again, thank you so much, Mary. I so appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. It's just been incredible.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I thank you for introducing your beautiful daughter. And Jude, it's been a real wonderful connection with you as well. So thank you.
Thank you. It has been a lovely connection, Mary. I feel I know you quite well already. I've only really known you in the past from being on the screen. So it's an honour for me and a privilege to be in your company and getting all of these downloads that are coming off you. Oh my goodness, what will tomorrow bring? And we would love to have you back on at some stage if you're open to that, Mary, because we have lots of questions, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
thank you. Thank you. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. And as we know, peace on earth. It starts with you. It starts with me. So good night to everyone, and God bless. Thank you for coming.